The next part of our discussion revolves around policy implementation, avoiding policy failure. Just because a policy is enacted does not guarantee that it's going to be successful. A lot of things get active and never come to fruition. To make sure that when you implement a health policy that it is going to be successful, the things that you need to do are, one, make sure that there is room for innovation. It not only is innovation which moves us forward, but it gets people excited and wanting to implement the policy. Two, there needs to be a technical or how-to package. It's all evidence-based, and because healthcare is provided in various areas and different people will be involved, how are we going to put this together? How is it going to work? And many of the policies and the grants and the research that we do, when we get federal money for it, it needs to be one of the reasons we get money is so that it can be replicated, and you can't replicate it without a how-to package. We need to communicate to all the people involved and externally to the people who supported the policy. We need to set partnerships, and partnerships will help to make sure, number one, that the load is carried, number two, that there is a level of accountability. Next, somebody needs to manage. If no one is managing the implementation, then nothing's going to move forward. It'll be chaos. And we need to have political commitment. We need to make sure that there is commitment that once the policy is made, that it will be implemented, and it wasn't just done to appease a group. Policies include statutory policy, and these are permanent. These are laws. They're legislatively enacted. And then non-statutory policies may be procedural manuals, institutional guidelines, practice guidelines, things of that nature. So now we are at the policy implementation phase in that wheel. So, a health policy can originate at either the legislative or executive branch of government. At the executive branch, although it may be something that an order that the president signed, but he or she, it's been he, but you know what I mean. The president can also influence Congress to pick up some of the ideas that they have and work in committee to make bills and laws. Policy may be further refined or altered by the judicial branch. An example of that would be Roe versus Wade in the 70s. The right to abortion was codified, and then more recently that was overturned. Another thing is birthright citizenship, which we're seeing right now in the Constitution. I believe it's the 14th Amendment. It says that people born in the United States are automatically citizens and have all the rights as citizens. Well, although it would take to overturn an amendment and change the Constitution, it takes I can't remember if it's 2/3 or 3/4 of both branches of Congress and the same number of states. So it's not just Congress that would do that, it would be the states. So it'd be very hard, but what the president could do is try to get the courts he can create an executive order and then come from the direction of interpretation of what that means, what it means to be born in the United States, although it seems pretty plain I think what the current administration wants to say is if you're born here because your parents are here illegally, then that doesn't count. Preferences and influence of interest groups, political bargaining, and individual and organizational biases also play a significant role in the process and in implementation. Getting people behind the policy is what's going to get it to move forward. And then there are emergency situations when there is an activation of emergency powers per se. There is a natural disaster or some sort of disruption in the country that gives emergency powers to people in the state and federal governments, or the invocation of the Defense Production Act, the DPA. What the DPA says is in times of crisis, in times of war, that focus goes towards developing manufacturing the things that we need. We shuffle money to, in wartime it would be to create bombs and etc. But during COVID, the president used the DPA to increase the production of PPE and ventilators, so that because even though it's the Defense Production Act, instead of against foreign enemies, it was against a pandemic. There are a number of federal health programs that are listed here. About 40% of the population is currently covered by some sort of federal health program. And that's why a lot of times people who advocate for national health care say, why don't we just add 60% to that? But right now, about 40% are covered by those sorts of health programs. Sometimes the federal policies implementation at the state level is an issue. It may be, it just does not translate well on the state level. It says here the state may be set up differently. There might be unfunded mandates involved. So to get better implementation at the state, they may do an innovation waiver, which allows some leeway in how the policy is implemented to make it more palatable and more likely to be implemented when it at the state level. Judicial branch influence on health policy. When the judicial branch intervenes is when a policy is seen to intrude on basic human rights, or they feel that the programs or policies are not being implemented according to the original intent of the law or the policymakers. So that's what they're assessing. But we have to remember, when issues are evaluated by higher courts, we have to remember that they're appointed by political figures. There's no accountability to the public. Most of them are long-term or lifelong appointments. Most of them have minimal experience in scientific thinking. Most judges are lawyers, so they're focused on the law, not on science. And very rarely will a judge have experience or expertise in health issues. Sorry, I jumped. What can enhance effective implementation? making people know why this policy or law needs to be enacted. What are the benefits? Working with your legislators and all levels of government to prioritize this policy, and if it's an innovation, how it's going to improve both financially and improve the health of the population, and always making sure there has to be adequate financial resources for a policy to be effectively implemented. Then you look at the implementation climate. How do people feel about that policy? How are they feeling? Are they feeling like it's going to work? Do they feel good about it? The innovation values fits. Is it innovative, and does it fit with the values of the groups that are implementing it? And then the implementing effectiveness. Does it work? Did it do what you intended? Has it worked out? Barriers to implementation. The number one is people problems. Somebody's agenda gets in the way. People don't feel that it is a priority. People don't feel that they have been given the resources needed. Diversion of resources. What could happen is something else crops up and you don't have quite the resources needed to implement the policy as was originally planned. Deflection of goals, putting the eye on something other than the goal of the policy enactment and muddying the waters so that people don't see clearly why it's important. And then dissipation of energy. You don't communicate, you don't talk it up, you don't get people excited, and it just deflates, and people aren't concerned about making sure that it happens. Policy failure. There's a statement. I think it is in the book also, that a policy does not fundamentally achieve the goals the proponents set out to achieve. Is the definition of policy failure. When you think about failure, there's two ways of thinking it. It's either a top-down approach, the people who wrote, who passed, who developed the policy, or what caused it not to be successful, or the bottom-up approach is the people that tried to implement it, they were at fault. They didn't do what they needed to do to successfully implement. And then to evaluate it, you look at all these things. Did it meet the original objectives once it was implemented? Was it implemented as intended, or was there a U-turn that happened? It wasn't implemented the way it was intended. Was the target group that you were trying to improve things for, did they have any benefit? Did the benefits outweigh the costs of the policy? If the costs outweigh the benefits, then it's going to fizzle out and dissipate any forward momentum. Does it satisfy criteria that the policy sector considers valuable? They usually will give you a prescription, an idea of the things that they are looking for that you need to speak to when you're evaluating your policy. Did it meet legal, moral, or ethical standards? Did the stakeholders support this policy? Did they say, yeah, this is a good idea, and we support this, and it's going to make our lives better, it's going to make our health better? Did it improve on the situation with the problem prior to the implementation of the policy? And did it improve by comparison to a similar jurisdiction? Those are the things that they look at. When they do research on implementation policy, they talk about big P versus small p policy. Big P are laws, they're rules, they're regulation, they're codified, they're statutes. They're things that are, legally binding. Small p are healthcare policies, guidelines used in research and practice. They're small p's. They are what's best, but they are not law. Implementation science. It's important in evidence-based practice because sometimes very intelligent people study things and they set some evidence-based practice that this is the best way to do something. But in practice, people aren't adapting that. That isn't the way they do it. There's a discord, and that needs to be studied. An example of that would be the correct way to administer meds through a G-tube. I can tell you what all the evidence says on what is the best way to give your medications. But when I have older in-laws, and I've been in a lot of nursing homes lately for rehab, short-term stays. And I can tell you that I see people doing it the most expedient way rather than the way that evidence-based practice says that we should be doing it. Implementation science is something we use to test the effectiveness of clinical practice, evidence-based practice strategies. We see how it was effectively implemented. Does it have the best intentions? Did it do what we wanted? And are people changing their practice? And it will have a limited scope and time frame for implementation. Now, policy implementation research focuses on big P issues, the law, and that looks at why some policies versus other policies are effective versus ineffective, what people can do to have their policies implemented in a positive manner. Power is needed to get policy implemented. Power is needed to get a policy passed and implemented. There is a political pyramid where people compete for power in an environment of scarcity. When there's not a whole bunch of unlimited resources, there's a power pyramid, kind of like Maslow's pyramid, but not so fair. You need to know what is the power pyramid. What are the things that are most powerful and least powerful when you think about getting things done? A scarcity of power occurs when some people are gaining power at someone else's expense. So someone is gaining power by others losing power. And there's a comparative gain in power resulting in a shift in the distribution of power. And one example of that right now is, and I'm not being political one way or the other, I'm just saying this is the case. Right now, we have the Republican Party is in office in the executive as the president. It's the majority in both houses of Congress, and most of the people on the Supreme Court, although they are supposed to be Switzerland and not be partisan, most of them were appointed by Republican presidents. So right now, it's lined up so that the Republican Party's agenda it's going to the distribution of power shifted, so they are going to have the power to execute their agenda more effectively. It's not the only time. Sometimes it lines up that way for the Democrats, but there is a shift in the distribution of power. So when we talked about in the last video different types of power, when we talk about power here in implementation, they often talk about relational power, and that's your influence. It's not attached to your position necessarily. It's and it's attached to your ability to, it's not legitimate. Legitimate power is more structural power. It's because of a role. It's because of the rules. The rules give you that power. With relational power, it is because of your relationships. And then dispositional power is another form of power. It's more your ability to influence others. You don't necessarily have a relationship with them like relational power, but your ability to influence them. I'm not going to go through the whole case study. It is in your book, but sometimes policy implementation is rejected by the citizens. And one example of that is in North Carolina. The General Assembly in the state overhauled the tax code and got rid of all deductions. And, so your medical deduction, your homeowner taxes, you couldn't deduct interest on your mortgage. You couldn't deduct those things anymore. So, but what they did was they thought it would be okay because they were going to increase the standard deduction, the deduction that everyone gets. And they thought, they did research and said, oh, the standard deduction is higher than what people usually put as deductions on their taxes. So this is going to be fine. And most people are going to benefit. Well, the people that didn't benefit were people over age 65 and people that made $84,000 or less per year. Those folks actually paid more. For example, senior citizens in the year that it was implemented on average paid an additional $1,800 in taxes. So yeah, people got, if you can imagine, if your taxes went up $1,800 and the people over age 65 are a big chunk of a population, especially somewhere in North Carolina, people are moving to, once they retired in North, South Carolina, in Florida, those types of places. So there's a lot of senior citizens. So they began a letter writing campaign and got AARP and other groups involved. And there was lobbying. So they let their displeasure be known, and the deductions were reinstated. And you can skim through that, read that case study that's in your book. But it shows that when people get angry, especially older folks, when they get angry, they aren't afraid to speak truth to power and say, you need to fix this. Okay, so in this chapter, we talked about implementation with policy. These are problems that are widespread. When the implementers, the people who are working to implement the policy, are not working in lockstep with, or lockstep's kind of harsh, but in tandem with the legislative goals of the policy, then the recipients are going to be the ones that lose. And we as a nursing community, along with our other healthcare professionals and special interest groups, can affect implementation in both positive and negative ways. When it's a good policy, we should be impacting its implementation in a positive way. If it's something like what happened in North Carolina, we should be on the side of those senior citizens and making sure that that policies don't impact the people that are supposed to be helped by the policy in a negative manner.